I'm Ollie Geddes, a second-degree black belt under Roger Gracie. For the last 12 years, I've been almost exclusively a half-guard player, and in this film I'm looking to share with you all of the tricks and tips that I've picked up over that time. I hope it comes in handy for you, and it gives you a basis to start building your own half-guard game from this point onwards. Thank you. To have an effective half-guard, it is very important to have the appropriate launching pad for all of your techniques. So the first thing we're going to look at is the structure of our bodies that will allow us to set up all of the following techniques. We'll begin with the knee shield. The purpose of the knee shield is to control this hip, because this is one of the ways that my opponent is going to put pressure on me. So the first thing I'm going to look to do is to set up tension on that. I'm going to take my bottom leg and I'm going to pull it back a little bit. My knee will be roughly in between his knees. You don't want to go too deep. I want to be roughly here. I will pull and my top knee will drive into him, pushing him backwards, which will begin to make him sit back a little bit. Once I've created this tension, I'm going to roll my feet around each other and create this drive through his body. As that happens, my hip is going to push into my knee, and my knee is going to push through him, which will create a lot of power in this specific direction. Now, my knee itself should be roughly along the midpoint of his body. If it's too far over, my hip collapses, the angle isn't so good, and he can potentially crush my knees down. If it's too much over, he can just weave around it, and it doesn't stop his forward progression. So, importantly, if I just try to lock it up here, it's very hard to get my feet locked in the first place, and I don't have a lot of tension behind it. So what I need to do, again, is to create that scissoring effect. I pull his knee towards me, push his hip backwards, cross my feet, and then to continue and finish the tension, I will drive my left hip through him, and this will give me the first point of control, and it's one of the most stable ways to ensure I keep control over his leg whilst I'm setting up everything else. The second thing that I need to control on my opponent is this shoulder here. This is the other thing he's going to progress with, he's going to potentially cross-face me with, and I need to have the ability to prevent that. There's two different ways of doing that depending upon the range of my opponent. If he's a little bit further away, the traditional way is to take a collar grip here with my knuckles directly into his collarbone here, and then have my arm almost fully extended in a stiff arm position. So if I need more power, I may place my hand on the ground and push with it more there. If I have enough pressure, I can still stay on my elbow. In general, honestly, you will be on your hand when he's at this kind of range, depending on the length of your arms. That's the first thing we look at, it's blocking. So I will have control of this hip with my legs and this shoulder, so I have this cross control. The second situation is when he's a little bit closer, where we're going to go to a more traditional defensive thing. Because I cannot put my hands on the ground and things to create distance, so I'm going to have to prevent him from coming further forwards. So what I'm going to do, one hand is going to go on the shoulder, one hand is going to go on the bicep, and both of my elbows are going to tuck inside here, mostly to prevent this grabbing around my head. Again, he can reach a little bit, he may even grab a little bit on my shoulder, but it's not dangerous until he has that full shoulder grip. So in defending this side, depending on his range, there's two different ways of doing it, but if he's closer to me, if I cannot create that space, then it's a defensive bear paw position. Here, if he's a little bit further away, it will be here, and then generally at least on my elbow, or often on my hand, driving away here. Don't fully lock your arm, because sometimes you may have an unpleasant training partner who tries to armbar you really hard. So you need a slight bend, but you also need that power where your strength is coming from your shoulder, through your elbow, to your hand. This isn't really good enough. And the positioning, finally, I don't want to go all the way behind his neck, because then I lose the ability to control the shoulder. So I come a little bit lower, I work on the collarbone itself, so I literally affect this corner and this corner of his torso. The first and most basic sequence from the half guard is the underhook sweep sequence, which we will look at to begin with. The first step here is for me to establish my underhook, which is to take this arm underneath my opponent's armpit and reach this position. Now, there's a number of ways of doing this, but in general, I find the easiest to create some tension with the collar grip here, push forwards a little bit, and then it's important when I'm establishing the underhook that I do not give my opponent the chance to re-establish it on me. So if I reach a long way here, he has a lot of space to circle his arm back inside. So for this to work, my general way of setting it up, I will start with a collar grip here. We'll look at secondarily with the paw grip afterwards. I'm basically going to connect my forearm to his body here and my shoulder with it. So I end up with my forearm across his chest. Once I'm here and I've closed the space down, I'm then going to roll my arm around to establish the underhook. This limits the amount of space for him to pummel back inside on me. Again, if I can do it off this way, I will sit up, push the elbow all the way into, literally I'm trying to elbow strike him in the chest. I will sit my head in, and then I will keep my arm where it is and roll it around to have the underhook. As I do this, it's very important that I get my knee out of the way, and then I bring him forwards, and we move into this position here. Secondarily, if we're doing the same thing from the bear paw position, which is here and here, it's the same idea, but I will sit up inwards a little bit shorter, connect with the forearm as before, circle the arm around, and settle in. Start moving the arm around his back and getting my positioning behind him to set up the following sweeps. Once I've established the underhook on my opponent, I have some degree of upper body control, but the next stage is gaining a better lower body control to set up the following sweep. So with either entrance, in this case I'm going to start mostly with this because it's the easiest one to get started with. Again, I'm going to sit in, I'm going to connect, I'm going to roll the hand around as my knee comes out the way, establish the underhook here. Now, the next step is that right now, when I arrive, he's probably still relatively seated backwards. I mean, he'll move a little bit, but I have to establish some space between his heel and his butt cheek, because that's what I'm going to do to stop him retreating. So as long as he's here, I can't go anywhere because there's nowhere for me to rotate around him. There's literally no space. So once I have the underhook, you have the option of holding his belt. I usually just stay around the back. And then my other hand, I'm going to dive between his legs and I'm going to throw him onto his face in this direction here. So I'm going to drop under, I'm going to pull in and place this point here. This will open up a lot of space in between his heel and his backside. Once I'm here, I'm going to step my left leg over his foot and pull backwards, pulling the heel to my backside, which will twist his knee out and give me a lot of control over the rotation of his body. As an extra element, usually I will now slide my knee underneath his knee, so I have much more rotational torque on his knee, and as this pressure will constantly be turning him a little bit towards the left as I pull my heel backwards and push my other knee forwards. This is the tight underhook position from which most of our other attacks here can be launched. Once I have control of the upper body and the leg I'm entangling, the next step is to get control over the other leg. So the first thing I'm going to do, again, bring him forwards. We get to here, we establish the knee twist on the other side. And now the next stage is I want to control his pants here at the knee. This isn't quite as easy as it looks because usually I'm here in the first place and I don't easily have access to the pants. It might be too close to me, my hand might be a bit trapped, it's a bit harder. So if I'm looking to get that pressure, usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my shoulders inwards and retract my elbow so it's much easier to reach the pants grip directly. If I'm all the way deep here and I'm a bit flatter, it's very hard to make this transition, particularly if your shoulders aren't particularly flexible. So the next step to get control over this leg and give me basically full control of his body is to turn my chest down, pull my right shoulder backwards, grab the cloth here. It's nearly always on the inside because there's a lot of cloth to hold on to, which means you're not testing your grips particularly. And then once we have this, I will have control over his hips, his upper body, his one leg, and his other. Once we're here, we should be sweeping the vast majority of the time. From this position, we're going to move to our first sweep. So I have these controls here. The one slight change I'm going to make now I have this control. This hand here, I'm going to try and slide it a little bit more around his waist to grab this little hole in the side of the pants that doesn't have a name as far as I'm aware. We're going to grab the side here. This gives me rotational control of his hips. If I'm a little bit lower down, it's kind of straight. So I'm looking to grab around here instead and pull back towards me a bit. Now, I need to get myself to my knees, and the advantage of the knee twist setup I've already got is that my leg is already mostly free. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push his knee away a little bit to take his weight off me, using my knuckles here. So I push a little bit away, so he's a little bit lighter, and then I'm going to pull it back in, but use that movement to rotate my shoulders. So I'm going to pull my shoulder towards me, my elbow towards me, and drive my knee to the ground in between. I will probably have to base on my head initially, depending how explosive you are, but usually I'll push away, I will pull back, my head will come down, and I will turn to my knees here. Once I'm at this point, I'm going to start to pull my elbow to the floor here. Once my elbow flares out successfully, I will have a decent base, and then I will drive sideways across him to put him down flat on his back here. Come back up again a second. So I have my basic position starting off. I will reach around, I will grab the side, I will push away to create some space, I will start to turn, I will drag up at the same time, and then I'm going to just basically either hold the knee or pull it towards, and then walk my body all the way over to put him flat on his back. And then I establish the top position from there. When dealing with an opponent who has a very strong base, it's not going to be that easy to just get to your knees. Although I do have mechanically very strong grips, a very good wrestler, someone with a very strong whizzer, might make life very difficult for me. So in this case, I'm going to need a second option, which will use his defense to set up my next attack. So we're going to start exactly the same way. I'm going to push his knee away a little bit, I'm going to turn myself up, and I'm going to get myself to my knees here. But then I feel I can't, usually my arm's overextended, I can't fully complete the takedown. I can push into him, but he doesn't fall over. So from where I am, as I start to push, I will wait for him to give me some pressure backwards, and as he pushes back into me, I'm going to sit down to my butt, but in a sweeping kind of motion. So I'm not going to sit away from him here, because this means the weight doesn't cut underneath, and I don't move him enough. What I'm looking to do is to slide my knee basically to here. As I do this, I'm going to pull my heel very tight towards my butt, which will put a lot of rotational pressure on his knee and force him to step over to the other side. So I have my grips in, and you should already have if you've been doing this right, there should be this nice massive handle of cloth here, which you can work with from then on. You start to push in, and then as he pushes back, I'm going to sit down under him here. I'm going to pull my heel to my butt. I'm going to flare upwards and start to twist his knee. This should get me to this point. Then as I push upwards, it will complete the turn. I'll come to this side. You can either settle into side control here, which has advantages and disadvantages, or I can step all the way over the top, which I prefer, which puts me straight into a head down, half guard passing position. If I end up on this side, this is okay, but it's very common to have your arm get trapped here. He keeps holding onto my arm with the overhook, and I can't get my arm out and establish the side control. So to avoid that happening, I will generally step over here, which puts us in exactly the same position as we were from the previous technique. And we'll arrive with the head in the face, the underhook, and ready to pass. One of the most common ways of passing the half guard is with the knee slice. Now, the purpose of the knee shield is to prevent his knee from coming up, but on occasion, it will still manage to sneak out. So I'll be able to bring his knee up here. Now, as soon as this happens, the first thing I have to try and avoid is his knee actually pinning my leg to the ground. If my knee hits the floor here, he will continue with the knee slice because I lose all of the structure in my lower body. So as soon as the knee comes up, the first thing I'm going to do is retract my knees to my chest and try to hug with my elbow underneath my knee, which means that there's a buffer between my knee and the floor, and it makes it almost impossible for him to cut the whole way over. And this is the first step of defending him from raising the knee. The second thing, though, is once I get, he's going to try to put one hand on my chest, start to push me down, and try to pull this arm out. So I can't stop that completely, but to limit it, I'm going to make sure my body stays turned towards this side. And so if he pulls the arm, he pulls it away, but he doesn't take it completely away from my body and control my entire upper body with one grip. So if he does pull it, I'm still going to be roughly here. Now, I'd like to get myself an underhook from here, but it's almost impossible to get this hand through. And also this control is going to make it very hard to continue with my rotation. So to get the underhook, what I'm going to do, rather than going inwards this way here, I'm going to turn my arm over, and I'm basically going to turn my chest down to the ground, and I'm going to bring my hand through threading the needle here, so the back of my hand is behind him, and this means that my shoulder helps support it. If I'm this way around again, I'll get to here, and I'll just get stuck. So my hand comes over, back of the hand comes through, and I basically sweep off his back with this. Now, my knee here is currently in the way, so I'm going to remove the leg behind, and I'm going to knee him in the butt a little bit just to bring his base forward. If I do this hard enough, he'll often have to let go of my sleeve and base his hand on the ground here. Once I have this in play, I can go a little bit deeper and go around the back. I can go underneath here, do my leg switch, and establish myself in the regular underhook half guard position. One slight change that might happen, if I find that I'm set here and his knee is a little bit too deep and I can't actually step over and control it, I can use my elbow to block his knee and then basically move up a little bit, slide it down a tiny bit further to make it possible for my other leg to hook it successfully. And once we're here, we come in, and we've established our half guard. One more time, and a little bit faster. So his knee comes up. The first thing is the retraction here. My arm holds there. And then if he continues to go, if he has any kind of forward lean before I do it, I will be able to magnify it and move to my better position. If he's 100% perfectly upright, it's very hard to make this happen, but the vast majority of the time, there will be some lean for me to work with. So I'm here, my elbow tucks in, this comes over, and again, his frame is based on my shoulder here. This is what's helping him keep his base. So when I turn my shoulder over, that disappears, and his balance collapses a little bit. So we come over, the back of my hand comes through, this gets out in the way, because obviously it's too much in the way right now. It comes behind, back of the hand is here, he's not forward enough, so I knee once, here, hand comes behind, I have the leg but I haven't got a good step over, elbow comes in, push a little bit, hold, I then go straight to holding the pants, or if it's not available so easily, I come straight to my underhook, and that allows me to go from him being in the middle of his knee slice to a strong defensive underhook sweeping position. Once I finish either variation of the underhook sweep, I'm generally going to arrive on top in this position. If I've done the regular pulling sweep, I'll arrive here. If I did the rollback sweep, I will often arrive on this side, but I can very easily pin the knee and step over to end up in an identical position. Now, it's a very strong passing sequence from here, which is one of my favorite things to carry out in Jiu-Jitsu. So, keeping this knee pinned down, the first thing I'm going to do is drive myself forward and put my head underneath my opponent's jaw. I'm going to get myself nice and close here so I can start putting his back flat on the ground. I'm still keeping this knee where it is. As I do this, I may have to slide up a little bit higher, so my underhook that was around the waist is now going to become an underhook up in the armpit here. Head is underneath the jaw here. Now, keeping this knee pinned down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift myself up, and also keeping his knees both facing this side. I cannot allow him to bring his knees back to face me, because now I'm just passing. That's fine, but I want to pass with all of the mechanics on my side. So, as I've arrived here, I'm keeping both of his knees down. My hips, if necessary, can drop on the top leg as well to keep both of his knees facing this way. So, my underhook is in, my head is underneath the jaw, and I'm going to start driving forwards with my hips and pushing his bottom knee backwards so they start to scissor a little bit, trying to force the top knee to be in front of the bottom knee. Again, the underhook is in, the head is underneath the jaw here. So I start to push this down, my left knee will cut through, and I'll end up here with my leg driven through both of his from here. Okay. Now, once I'm a little bit closer, it's easier to put my weight on his upper body and his shoulders here. So my head that was next to him is now going to come down, and I'm going to end up with it next to his ear on the floor here. Okay. This also usually means I can now control his arm more easily, and I can get myself set up with an overhook on this side and an underhook on the opposite side. Now, if I need to, this knee can come all the way through now and will help with fully splitting his legs apart. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take this leg and I'm going to try and place it on his hip on this side. Obviously right now that's not available to me because he's turned all the way onto the side here. So I'm going to basically start to bring this upwards to start to rotate his torso further and to begin to expose this open face of his hip here. My right foot is going to come onto it. Here, my head is on the ground next to his head, and then my left leg that was kind of free the whole time here is just going to glide over to the other side, and we'll arrive with both knees at the same time in the mount position here. Again, all of your weight will arrive at the same time. They should make this nice whoomphing noise as your weight settles onto them. That's a sign that you're doing it right. So to back up again. As we first arrive here, again, I need to make sure this is turned over. So this grip is very important for keeping his hips turned. If I face out or whatever, he will turn and face me. And it's okay to pass normally, but we want to make things as strong as we can. So we'll force this down. If it needs to go away a bit more, that's also okay. Again, head in the jaw, underhook high. Here, again, keep pushing yourself forward, keep pressuring in. Force the leg backwards. Here, once my knee is cut through, I no longer need the pants grip. I can take the elbow becomes mine. Again, he might try and push me with it as well, which makes it even easier. We hold the elbow tight. Some people prefer to do it this way. I feel it compromises my elbow a bit and it might get trapped more. I don't feel so natural. I feel this is easier, but both ways do work fine. Head starts close to his jaw, drives down to the ear. Then we drive off my right toes and lift the arm to really twist his torso flat. Foot comes to the hip, other leg glides over, whole body weight arrives at the same time, and you settle into the mount position. So you can go from the sweep to the pass to the mount. That's 9 points and a really, really clean sequence that I like to use all of the time. In an ideal world, both of the previous sweeps would work on the first attempt, but the reality is that your opponent is going to fight very hard to prevent you from completing your objective. So when we're doing each of these techniques live, we are probably going to be going back and forth between each of them until we eventually end up on top. What this means is that in a night, what will probably happen is I will get to my knees, I will push, he will push back, I will start to sweep him, he will base his foot out on this side, here, he'll come back on top, I will use that momentum to come back up again, I will push again, and then I might finish the first one, or maybe he pushes back again, and on the second attempt, he goes all the way over. Come back a second. So what this means is you're going to be chaining both sweeps back and forth because each time he reacts to one, he will play slightly more into the following one. And so as each time his reaction becomes greater, becomes more pronounced, the effectiveness of the following sweep becomes greater as well, until there's no way he can defend enough to prevent you completing the sweep. So one more time. So if I'm starting in here, again, I will usually push away. I will create that. Once I get to my knees for the first time, the rollback sweep is always more powerful because I can drop with a lot of momentum. If I just start flat on my side here, if I can't get to my knees to begin with, I can lead with the turn here, which is going to fail, and that's fine. It may not even go at all. He may just get to here. But as his weight comes down, I can get myself up. Then I'll push, he goes back, and then realistically, it will take a few attempts to make things happen. But the most I've ever had to do in competition is 5 back and forth across there. You cover a lot of ground, but eventually, as long as you keep the grips and you're forcing him to react to you, you will end up with the sweep that you have been fighting for. Whilst it would be great to be able to establish the underhook and effortlessly sweep our opponent every time, the reality is, particularly when you're starting out, you're going to spend a lot of time in worse positions in half guard. Again, you may try to get an underhook, you may mess it up, and your opponent will smash you flat here and establish his crossface and his underhook on the other side. Now, the first thing for me that's important here is to limit the amount of pressure that he can put in terms of messing with your posture and the alignment of your body. So the first thing I'm going to focus on is using this hand here to grab around his head and into the armpit here. This means that my shoulder projects a little bit into his jaw and it avoids the thing I'm trying to avoid happening, which is him turning my head to look to the other side. Once this happens, I have very little chance of getting back to a position that I'm comfortable with. So what I will generally do, I'd like to have the underhook, but if I don't have the chance to get it, my first step is to reach over to grab the armpit here, project my shoulder into his face, and then usually I'm going to take my left foot, step it out a little bit, and turn my hips as well. This means that although I'm in a bad position, I'm at least not fully contorted and controlled by my opponent. Once I have partially established a defensive position, the next thing I'm looking to do is prevent him from putting too much pressure towards me, and then eventually, because if he does keep pushing his shoulder into my face, he will eventually be stronger than my shoulder is. He'll turn me and he'll be able to get to a good passing position. So the next step I'm usually going to go for is to try and control his legs and prevent him from really bringing his butt up in the air and starting to drive the pressure behind the shoulder. So I'm going to go to the lockdown. I don't use the lockdown the whole time, but it is an extremely effective way of preventing someone from driving their weight through onto you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my outside leg, I'm going to step it over and just place the heel directly behind his knee here. My other foot is going to hook under his foot, and then I'm going to pinch my knees together and extend away, which should always bring his hips slightly away here. I don't want to do this at the cost of facing towards the other side. So I don't want to push away and do this, because I'm still contorted too much here. So I want to push away, but maintaining the angle of my body to some extent here. Once I have this, again, I will have the ability to start, there's no immediate passing threat, and I can start moving towards getting to a better position. Now that we have temporarily nullified our opponent's passing pressure, we're going to look at just going from here back to the underhook position to set up our own attacks. So the first thing I'm already on my side, I already have a certain degree of pressure, diminishing how much his shoulder is in my face, but I will need to deal with this arm if I want to move towards an attacking position. So generally, keeping this pressure in, I'm going to take the back of my hand inside, and I'm going to clasp my hands into the space here. And I'm going to push this away and try and break the grip. If I can go to here to keep it away, so much the better. If I can only get to here, that's okay temporarily, because it again limits how much pressure he puts on my face. Once I have this, my other hand is going to circle around, keeping this small. Don't try and lift your elbow, because you'll end up arm triangle or something on this side. Okay, so make sure that you're going to circle the elbow over, and once I get to here, I'm going to shave his face with my forearm, and we'll come straight down to the side here, while still trying to make sure my body is aligned towards the right. If I can deal with this and this, we're now most of the way to where we need to be. I'm going to bring my knees up a little bit, bring his head forwards, and then much like before, I'm just going to drop my elbow across his body. Again, a common mistake here is to get to this point here and then to try and bring your hand through here. Once you've been training jiu-jitsu for a little while, your shoulders don't do that anymore, so you're going to have some trouble. So if I try and put this through here and he hits forward pressure, my elbow will go vertical, and now I can't make anything happen. So once I get to here, for me the most important stage is just to roll around and establish again this forearm across chest position whilst limiting how much pressure he puts on my head. If I do miss this and he does still have my head, I can still make this work, because it's still very hard for him to get the underhook back because there is no space inside my elbow. But in an ideal world, I would defend this and have this blocking here. Okay, once I'm here, I'm going to use my knees. I'm going to basically lift his heel up and pull my knees to my chest to bump him up a little bit more. Then my hand will rotate, much as it did before. I'll establish my underhook around the back. This hand will now swim down, making sure that my head doesn't stay up. Don't do this and this, because again, he'll smash your face here. So generally, I'm going to take the top of my head, put it into his shoulder, armpit area, so there's no way he can really control it easily. Bump a little bit more, underhook the leg here, establish the knee twist, and then we can move to our regular underhook sequence again. The lockdown is a very strong option if your legs are the same length or longer than the person you're working with. But if they're significantly taller than you, it's quite hard to establish the level of distance from the lockdown to remove their pressure. So generally, if you are a little bit shorter, sometimes you'll find the easier option is to go to half butterfly guard and create the space that way, because you cannot simply extend their leg. So we'll start with the same idea, the same grips, and you may even start with a loose lockdown just to bring their knee back a little bit to create a tiny bit more space. You don't need to, but it will often help. Now once I'm here, I'm going to take my right leg, I'm going to step out a little bit with my left, and I'm basically going to end up hooking with just one and with my hips tilted hard towards the right. Okay, once I'm here, I'm going to rotate my foot, keeping my knee where it is, and I'm going to place a single butterfly hook inside his legs here. Now, you've got some options here. You can go back to full butterfly guard, but that's a whole thing for a whole different instructional, so I can push through, come to here and start playing full butterfly, or even all the way to close guard, which is fine. But for now, I'm just going to use that half butterfly hook in exactly the same way as the lockdown, to keep his hips away and to prevent him from stacking too much into me. So I've established my single hook. It's important, again, that my other foot is still holding his knee down. It's not just loose down by the foot. I'm keeping it really pinched in so he can't posture up too much. Then I'm going to use the same ideas. I'm on my side, so I'm going to bring this hand inside where I can. I'm going to clasp, going to pry, and I'm going to circle this in front of the face as before. And then once I've got to this, I push away, establish, again, the forearm across the chest. I can remove the hook now, underhook, and then go back to following the same underhook sequence one more time. Whilst traditionally you would look to pursue the underhook from this position, you can also pursue the overhook and set up a number of attacks quite easily. So if I'm starting here in flattened out half guard, I still at least have a certain degree of angling and posture control here. Now, from the previous technique, I pushed him away, I made a little bit of space, I did my pry inside here, and I got to this side, and then I worked around to get the underhook, okay? But the alternative is I can keep the position that I already have, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep his elbow away, and I'm going to replace my hand with my knee. So this may take a bit of movement depending again on the length of your legs and whether you're in lockdown or not, but the idea is very similar. So if I'm starting here, I'm basically going to start, I'm going to push away, I'm going to move back as I was, and then I'm going to push this down as my knee comes up. Okay, which will leave his shoulder sandwiched here with me. No, it's not a full overhook like you traditionally describe it as with a collar grip, but it does give me the equivalent control. It's also a lot less obvious, so if it takes a bit more time, he is less likely to react to it, to panic, and to try and pull his arm out. If I decide to do this, he knows I'm setting something up. He's going to try and react to that most of the time. If I'm just over the back, it's much less obvious where I'm going with things. So, if we're starting in flat here, again, I cannot do this if I start here, because I'm never going to create enough pressure to separate this, and I'm also on the wrong side of his shoulder. So I still need to get him away. So I can do that by going away with lockdown, pushing around, whatever I have to do here. But as long as his head is on this side of my body, I can now make this happen. I will probably, again, have to release the lockdown, pinch the leg like I was going to half butterfly, place my foot out, and move away, and then this will come downwards, and I will bring my knee up and basically try to knee myself in the face. You may actually knee yourself in the face, I've done that, but that's just an extra thing. Here, okay? So my foot may still be inside his legs, that's okay. But what I need to do is to really make him very small and allow myself to manipulate his shoulders more effectively. So my knee will come in front of the bicep, and I'm basically just going to wipe his arm over my knee here. I'm not going to try too hard to stuff it or make it too obvious. It's too big a movement there. So I come up, I push it down. I may even grip it in to have the tension, and then my other knee will come up and pinch on the shoulder, and we'll set up some attacks afterwards from here. As a variation of the previous technique, we can also do exactly the same movement from half butterfly. So we'll do the same ideas of creating space. So I will push away a little bit, I'll move my butt out, I will circle my left foot inside, I'll make my prying position here and establish it. And now, rather than, again, coming out and clearing and going for the underhook, I'll keep my half butterfly, I will scoot away, this will come down, and I will have to unhook my foot because I've created some space, so I'm going to push him away a little bit. My knee will come up, my other knee will come up, and again, we'll establish this knee sandwich position, keeping his elbow trapped here. I can't have my chest too open because that will make this hand able to come out, so I will have to just crunch my chest in to really keep the elbow and the shoulder fully secured. And my knee again should stay above. If it does not, there's a chance he'll stuff my leg underneath and I will lose a lot of my flexibility and I will not be able to follow up with any easy attacks. When I have a good knee shield established, there's less chance of my opponent just controlling my head. So I don't have to worry so much about him getting an underhook in on this side. There's different schools of thought, but for me, I would say that the cross face here is the bigger issue. That's what's going to control my spine and prevent me from setting up the attacks. If he has the underhook on me, but he doesn't have a cross face, he just gives me access to his shoulder as long as I can manipulate his head and his spine to some extent. So a lot of the time, if I'm trying to set this up, I will sit up into the regular guard and I will not fight so hard for this underhook here. Obviously I need to make sure this shoulder is not getting too close, this hand isn't getting too dangerous, but I could even collapse back to here and allow him to take the underhook on the other side without really worrying so much. But when this gets to the next stage is when I'm ready, I will remove my top knee shield. This will come up again, same thing, establishing that head control here, and then my right knee will come inside, and we're back again to the same idea here. We'll look at this in more detail later, but right now, this knee, the important thing is that the knee is what comes down, not the foot. If the foot is out, then my hips naturally hinge the wrong way and he can turn. If my knee is down, I have a lot of control. I have my body weight sinking down and it prevents him from posturing up and escaping. So I can bait him into this as well. I can be sitting up. I can just reach over the back. He can try and drive. As long as his head doesn't get to the other side, the crossface is not super dangerous. As soon as his head can turn, this now becomes a problem, and I will lose most of the position. So as long as my knee shield is still good, I control here. I can fight down to this side. I can let him push forward all I want. And when I'm ready, again, this blocks. We chamber down with this Velociraptor grip thing going on here. And then this comes up, place in, and make sure your body turns and your knee chambers down hard, which also further controls his head and makes the turning back difficult. If there's enough space, my leg will come out completely, but most of the time I prefer to leave it hooked inside his knee because that will help with some of the later techniques. One of the most common counters to the half guard is the leg weave. This is where the player on top will pass his hand through your legs and eventually try to pin both of your knees together, and then he'll try to control the collar, smash things together, and then pass around to the side. This is very strong and is something that you do have to deal with very early to prevent it becoming a problem. Once someone fully has your legs pinned and a grip on the collar, they should nearly always pass. So we need to find a way to release this pressure. So I will start from here. Once he brings the hand in to establish the leg weave from here, the first thing I'm going to do, if I start trying to fight this arm, I will usually end up on my back. If I start trying to do this and this, then this happens. And again, either he'll pass past my knee to regular half, which is already annoying, or again, he'll be able to establish a grip, pull in, and then my legs no longer belong to me, and he'll pass my guard. So to avoid this and to nullify the pressure and the risk of me being really stretched out and made weaker from there, what I'm going to do is once he has the grip, I'm going to sit into him, which is kind of counterintuitive. But basically, I'm going to take my grip over the back and then place my head here. Okay, so again, he can try to smash the knees through from there, try to grab, but he can't really establish that full shoulder bend or that head twist that is required to really finish the pass. So what I'm looking to do is to grab over here to begin with, and if I can try and fight this, that's okay as well. Now, as long as I'm keeping my legs, even if he does break my legs open, I'm still going to keep my hips driven through and the grip here. Now, once I feel his head is diverted enough, my hand is going to come through and I'm going to place my hand on top of my thigh here. Okay? And then once I have this, I'm basically going to drive my shoulder forwards and basically strip his hand outwards, which now means the hand is isolated. This is still defending the crossface, and my knee will come up, and again, we'll establish this offensive overhook position from the bottom half. So one more time. So the pressure is in here. As I feel him getting ready for that, as he's getting ready to try and come out, I will sit in, and I'll place myself here. Okay? Again, I might even get pushed down to my back, that's fine, but as long as I'm this close, it's very hard for him to really get that spine twisted one. Again, he even grabbed the collar a little bit here. It doesn't really matter because I'm relatively safe. Then my hand will circle around, I will grab on the front of the knee and ensure that I have the ability to clear this hand out when I go, and then I will drive my top leg away, stripping the grip, push away at the same time here, and again my body comes back, the knee pins down, and once again we're ready to set up our overhook attacks from here. Once we've established the overhook position where we're isolating his shoulder and his head from the rest of his body, we can start looking at our finishes. But the first thing we have to do is make sure that we have sufficient control over his body and his rotation. So I have to make sure this knee is pinching down very strongly. If I feel that because of how close I am to him, that's impossible, I will just move myself a little further back to make that more strong from there. If I need to reinforce it even further, I can hug my knee, or I can hug around his elbow here. Anything that forces his hand to be higher than his elbow, to be higher than his shoulder. That will give me control. The more he can undo that, the more he can change that ratio, the worse things get. So once I get to this point for me, I'm going to move away a little bit. I'm going to just chamber this down hard. And then if I'm close enough, I will crunch in and hold. If I'm a little bit further away, I'll hold on his arm. Both ways are fine. So the first attack I'm going to go for is the stretch through omoplata, which is basically going to be, I'm going to pass my foot here behind my knee and establish basically a lockdown position with his shoulder on the inside. Okay, this requires a certain degree of flexibility, but it doesn't require as much as you'd think, because there are some tricks to make it easier for your body to do. So the first step is making sure that I can pass my foot in front of his face. And to do that, I don't want to release the pressure that's giving me control over his shoulder. So I need to focus on my knee first and not on my foot. If I try and bring my foot in front, again, he will posture up and I'll lose all of that control straight away. So I need to keep the knee down, maybe move a little bit further away, and then keeping this in, my back of my hand is going to come here, the foot will come over, I'm still looking to this side, don't try and come away, keep this down, back of my hand comes inside, we clear, and we come to here. Okay, now that I have this, to create a little bit more space, I'm going to straighten my bottom leg, I'm going to push away to give me some more space to work with, and now I need to start putting my foot, my toes, behind my knee. If I do this while I'm flat on my back, there's too much tension on my leg here for that to actually move properly. So to actually make this happen, I'm going to try and turn face down and start to pull my heel into my butt. So again, sometimes you may put your hand on the ground, whatever, but in general, I'm going to start to turn over to elevate this hip and then to tuck my foot underneath his leg here. Okay, so as we go, this is going to push out. Again, sometimes he'll step the leg up as well, which makes it a little bit easier. But I'm looking to push away, come around, circle the toes in, and then establish this. Much like the lockdown, once you get it, it's a very maintainable, very strong position. Okay, so I have my big toe underneath his leg here, and I have myself still trapped and his shoulder isolated here. And then to finish off, honestly, all you're going to do is stretch your legs through and start to just split him apart whilst putting all of your weight down on the shoulder here. If he's really, really flexible, you may go to holding the elbow and pushing the hand upwards. You may go to the Kimura, but most of those will create more space than the additional pressure you're going to get. So if I start doing this, what will generally happen is the hand will now rotate forwards, which is painful if you're not very flexible, but then there's no way to recover the position easily. So if we can just bring the arm back a second. So yeah, I have my position, I set this up, I push through, establish that through here. Most of the time I will try to just go here and here, but I will not try and do a full hook under, because then the hand will travel in front. It's usually easier to just come to here. If I can't finish this, then we will just remove the leg out and move towards a regular omoplata instead. And this may happen just because he steps out, or maybe I just prefer that finish, but then I'll move to the normal position, my legs are now free, and we do this like a regular omoplata from guard would normally be done. Rather than just presuming that you can finish an omoplata, I'm going to show what I think is mechanically the strongest basic finish. So, as we are right now, the ability to finish the omoplata is based upon my ability to put his shoulder directly on the mat with my weight pinning it down. As it stands, again, if he's a little bit bigger than me, it's quite hard to sit up, and I definitely don't want to try and sit up high, because this doesn't really help me with the pressure. I need to go downwards here. So in general, the best way to make this shoulder go down is to make the other shoulder go up. So the first, strongest way I find for this is to take the lapel on the far side, which should hopefully be untucked, and to bring it up, creating tension in the armpit, passing it to this hand, switching and passing it to a palm up grip on this. And that will, you'll see his other shoulder raise. As this goes up, this has to come down. And this also unbalances him an awful lot. So once I've established this, I'm now going to scoop myself sideways, dragging this upwards, which will bring his shoulder down to the ground and hopefully collapse him almost completely. If he goes completely flat, it's done. If he goes mostly flat, it's still very finishable. So I can put my hand down, or again, I can just turn my angle and drag to here and here, pulling up and pushing down as much as I can here. Once the shoulder comes down, I tuck in, my knee drops directly onto his shoulder. I can keep this pressure here, but probably for me personally now, I'm going to switch to an underhook, which follows the same principles, hook under and clasp here. And now, when I go to finish, I go downwards and then I drive my hips forwards and I whisper in his ear, which is the normal way. Don't go up too much. You can lift this far side. You can go the back of the collar as well if you want, but lift this up, sit down, and then go forwards here. Resist the temptation to come up and start trying to go here. It will either not work at all or tear his shoulder completely off, depending how flexible he is. So if we're here and here, like I have this lifted, this still stays high. Again, it can be here and here if you prefer. We lift this up, and then I go up just enough that I can put some pressure on my foot, and then I drive forwards and upwards here. So one more time, if you can. So I have the arm trapped here. Again, this gets passed over. I pull, creating tension. So I start palm down, other hand, palm up, and try if you can to get your elbow on this side of his body, not just across his back. Here and here. You can also grab the collar for this as well, but mostly we're going to look to drive across to rotate, bring him down. This leg goes behind, this leg goes here. Again, I can try and finish it from here. That will often still go, but for now, keeping this high, we hook under, far side underhook, clasp here, push off, and finish. Again, if you feel your balance is compromised, this also works just the same way. Rather than go directly to the triangle from the overhook, which you can do, but usually the angle is quite difficult because we've spent so much time pushing the person's head to the outside, the omoplata is always the more natural first option. But we can go to the triangle from the omoplata relatively easily. The grips I prefer for this, if I can, I'm still going to be gripping across the back somewhere, but I'm going to reach through my own legs and I'm going to grab the collar here next to his ear. Okay? I'm going to keep hold of the legs if necessary, and we're here. And then for the transition here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically remove one leg here. I'm going to pull him towards me, and I'm basically going to strip my leg through his head here to establish the position. Okay? So what this means is I'm not going to, the most common mistake people make here is they do a big circle with this, and the person has a chance to grab your leg or step over it, and you lose it. So from the omoplata, I will usually reach under, take this grip here, and then basically I'm going to pull, I'm going to turn my angle a bit towards him, and I'm ending up in this sort of weird perpendicular position, briefly. But again, I pull and then I stretch through the head, so there's no real space between my leg and the other side of his head, and we will arrive in our normal triangle position here. From here, then we can usually do normal finishes. You can pass the arm over, whichever way you prefer. But it does give you the triangle option from the half guard without you necessarily having to create a lot of space by going to the omoplata first and then making the natural transition back to the triangle. While in an ideal world it would be great to be able to control all of my opponent's actions, the nature of the half guard is, although there is a proactive game plan, which is pursuing the underhook as I've already shown, there are times when you cannot fully control what your opponent is going to do, and you need to have the appropriate reactive option. In this case, what we're going to look at is defending the hip switch, which is going to mean when, particularly heavier guys like to do this, when I want to try and get the underhook, I want to try and work in on this side. This is always the aim. However, if he takes that side away from me by switching his shoulders across to this side, that becomes incredibly hard to do. I mean, I can put the hand there. Even if I have it, if he switches over it, he can still crush me down. And the underhook is mostly useless from there. I can off-balance him, but generally, if I time it wrong, I will lose a lot of the progress I've just made. So, in this case, we're going to do it as a reaction to him doing it from the outside, but there's also other options we'll look at later. So the most important thing is when he does do the switch across here, say my knee isn't in the way and he turns down, is that he does not put me flat, okay? So if I'm looking up at the sky and he lands here, I'm going to go flat here. And at this point, his knee is going to probably come out, and then I'm now going to be defending. I have no good options from here that don't involve being really strong and really explosive, okay? So the important thing is that when this does happen, that I stay on my side. So again, generally to avoid also him cross-facing me or whatever during it, I'm going to be sitting up, again, having my control, and then if he does switch across, my hand will go here, just in case he does catch my head, and then I'm going to remove my knee shield, if it's not been removed already, and then I'm going to drop it, and then sit up and reach over his back here, okay? And this keeps me sitting up to my side. And I have to make sure from here that I do not make enough space for him to come around and tear my face off, okay? If I'm back here, this can happen. He goes under my nose. It gets very ugly very quickly. So I need to make sure that I move to one side. I grip. There's different options depending on exactly body types. Across the back is one. Across the belt is the other. If it's on the belt, it's going to be straight up towards his head. If it's across the back, it's going to be across the shoulder blades. It will depend a little bit on the angle you're looking for, but either of those is acceptable. The main thing is when I'm here now, I want to stop him from being able to reach around. So if I'm here and I pull this way, it should be very hard for him to reach in front of my face easily. If he does do that, we have a counter that we'll look at later on. But for now, I establish this position here, and my left foot for now is going to step over behind his knee and into this point here, and this is the beginning of the half octopus guard. This is named quickly as a variation of Eduardo Tellez's octopus guard, which is exactly the same thing, but from the full guard. And in this case, it's a very good counter to people who choose to pass this way. So, one more time. Again, I can be flatter, I can be down here, I can be sitting up, and I can even sometimes, I can actively pursue it. I might be on the wrist or whatever, and I can just sit through, and I come around to here. I go over the back or across the belt, again, depending on how high his posture is. And then I'm going to basically pull him down, fall to my side, still facing this way, and then just to make sure I can make my control, my left foot is going to step behind his knee and pin that knee to the ground. And this is the position B. If from here he starts to sit backward to try and pull my head, I will sit up with him. I cannot allow him to be flexible in the shoulder and to tear my face off, so if it comes up, I'll sit up more. If he's down, I can afford to basically pile drive his head into the mat. This is the beginning of a couple of options from the half octopus guard. From this position, my opponent has two basic options to try and pass or try to improve his position. The first one is for him to try and drop his weight down towards this side here and to start trying to extract his leg. Okay? Now, if I've been placing my legs wrong, this can be a problem, which means that if I have not stepped my foot over yet, then when he turns, he will usually hip out and the knee will come free. And now I'm in a lot of trouble because I've lost the control of his knee. So it's why it's so important to step my leg over, to have that heel inside, so when he switches, what will happen is my left hip will come up and my toes will be hooked in here, so it's very, very hard for him to undo that leg. He can push it through, but my toes are still flexed. He can push with the hand, but it doesn't change the actual angle from there. If I turn out even a tiny bit, it becomes very easy for him to escape. So I need to make sure this is in. You can also, by the way, when doing this, you can also put on a lockdown completely on the leg. That works fine as well. It just gives you slightly more ability to play with his base, but also limits your mobility a bit. Both ways are fine. For now, we're going to stick with just the classical single hook. So I have my toes flexed in. I have all this control. Since his butt is on the ground, he can no longer use this knee to base out. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn onto my front and extend my leg that's not hooked behind myself. Then I'm going to turn my shoulders over, my elbow will come down, and I will sit up into top position here. That will arrive you squarely in the mount, which is your strongest position that you can go from there. You may sometimes end up in half guard depending on his angle, but generally you'll end up in the mount and you can make your attacks from there. The other option my opponent has is to not allow his hip to go to the floor. So it's possible he may start the same way, it may go down that way first, so if he sits on his side as before, but then as he realizes what I'm trying to do, he will base the knee back out again, which will basically put me in a position where I can't sweep him over because his hips haven't turned. So basically all I'm going to try and do here is replace my guard. Because if you think about it, I already have a full arm drag going on here, so if I can get my guard back, I have a relatively clear path to his back. The usual way I'm going to set this up, because again, his legs are still quite heavy, so usually I'll take one hand, I'm going to hold the outside here, I'm going to pull him forwards and push the leg back a little bit. Then my knee will wipe inside, kind of like we did for the omoplata, and I'll get to here. Now, I can push a little bit further through, I can just drive back and establish like a half grapevine position here, or again, I can just do the whole thing with just moving myself out here. Basically, all I'm going to do, once I get my leg to either half butterfly or all the way out, is I'm going to pull him forwards and hip away very hard to this side. Depending how long your legs are, you'll have a couple of options. If you've got very long legs, you can just rotate all the way around to a body triangle. Again, if you're flexible enough for that. If you're not, you're basically just going to drag him sideways. You're going to do like a hip escape out to this side. You're going to move him to here, catch him one side, scoot away again. You may have the hook on top, or whatever. Second hook can come in, and there. If you're more flexible, you can keep the body triangle the whole way through. That's generally the route you're going to follow on somebody who is about the same kind of weight as you. or even a little bit bigger. If they're much bigger, however, you're going to find this very, very hard, because once I get to here, particularly if he just sits back into his own space here, even if I get my leg out, it's incredibly hard for me to get my legs all the way around him, just because, again, I've got to get my legs, one leg mostly, around his entire torso. So if he's much heavier than me, that's very, very hard to do. So in that case, what I'll try and do the same start. I'll push away, I'll get to here, my leg may come out or not, and if he sits back in his own space here, I'm kind of a little bit stuck. I can't go around him, I can't drag him off. So what I'm going to do here, generally, I'm going to use my other leg here, and I'm going to place it in as a butterfly hook on the other side. So basically, if I'm here, I push away a little bit, I circle around, and I establish a butterfly hook on the inside here. Now, what I'm going to do, rather than go around his whole torso, is I'm just going to circle around this one leg. So I'm basically going to slide my left leg through here, sit up to make sure I don't lose the arm, and then I'm going to rotate just over this one hip here, which will put me on top and still relatively stable without the risk of trying to come around and then getting flattened out inside his close guard. From this position in general, it's not so bad. Most of the time, even if this goes wrong, you're going to end up in close guard. So even if you try and come around and it doesn't work, most of the time you're just going to end up back here. So it's a relatively safe transition once you get control of both of his knees. That is the half octopus guard back take sequence. Another variation on the half octopus guard sweeps and back takes is a slightly more advanced version. It's a little bit more specific in how you get there. So we're going to start basically the same way. I'm going to push off on this knee, I'm going to push him down, I'm going to remove my knee out from here, and I'm going to push myself through to here. And now, basically by getting to this position here, if he squares back up again, we're back to normal. If I can keep him on his side just a little bit, now I can chamber my leg through his leg and bring his knees together. Okay? If I'm really, really long-legged, I could go triangle here. Most of the time, I'm just going to squeeze my knees tight. Again, not so much around his thighs, as around his hips, as below the middle of his thighs, closer to his knees, so they stay stuck together. At this point, he loses the ability to really turn his body back to the stalling flat position. If he wants to put both of his knees on the ground from here, it's very, very hard to do because he's already been tilted so far out and he needs to spread his knees to get his base back. So by establishing here, I can now hip bump across the mount if I choose to by just cutting my bottom leg through and coming over here. And I can also use exactly the same sequence because I've collapsed his posture to move towards the back take as well. So again, rather than trying to go around here, I'm setting my pivot point now as both of his knees or mid-thigh area, so I can try and sweep to this side. He has to react to that. Usually he'll do it by leaning forwards, and then I can hip out the other way and come round, and we can set up the back take from there. So it's basically a very similar idea, but you're trying as much as you can to pinch their knees together rather than to try and just go around the hips themselves. So, again, we push down, this comes out. As I push this through, my foot comes away. I make sure my toes are pointing this way. It won't work if I go flat here. It has to be here. And then I chamber them both together. I cross my feet, and I squeeze my knees together. Once I'm here, again, I base out, turn. Most of the time you'll hit them out because it's basically impossible for him to stop, but if he does want to, he's going to basically have to face plant into the ground to make himself so heavy I can't turn him that way, but that creates all the space in the world for a regular back take afterwards. That is the leg lace variation finish from octopus half guard. Although we are trying very hard to prevent our opponent from bringing his hand in front of our face, on occasion this will happen. We'll lose control of his back, of his shoulders, and he'll be able to sneak that hand in front of our face here. Now, the most important thing we do here is not overreact to this and end up placing ourselves flat on our back. If I struggle against this, then I'm going to get put down here, my arm is going to get trapped, and I'm just going to get smashed. So what I have to do is take the pressure as it is, so as the hand comes in front, and I'm going to have to turn my whole body to the right here. Because again, the same problem comes down with my flexibility. If I try and get my hand back through here, it's incredibly hard to do. My shoulder doesn't do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come around, and I'm just going to pull my elbow into my hip here. Okay? This doesn't solve the problem, but it does mean that I'm not trapped in this really awkward arm triangle-esque position. So I'm here and here. And then what I have to do now is I'm going to swim my elbow through and move myself out towards the left again. So I'm going to go back to the regular underhook. But again, it has to be done with the elbow first, not with the hand first, because you're just going to get stuck. So the elbow will come through, and then I'm going to shrug and shrimp my hips away. So I'm connecting to the middle, and I move him away and come round, re-establish the underhook, and then again we can progress down the underhook sequence from there, underneath the leg and everything. It should also be noted that I can do exactly the same in reverse should he do a slightly non-standard counter and go over my body here. Some people like to do this usually because they're trying to crank your neck really hard and crush you down, but sometimes you'll end up here. Same thing applies. I can circle my hand around, slide through, bring it around again, and establish the half octopus guard from here. Again, to keep his posture down most of the time, if I feel a little bit uncomfortable, I'm going to go for the knee and the belt, and I'm going to stretch him out here. If I need assistance again, I have the option to go to the lockdown here, and now I have the control, and I can start my 2 primary sweeps from this position. The Kimura from half guard is often seen as a technique that you'll see a lot at the lower levels, but you don't see all that much with higher level guys. People will hold it, but they'll very rarely actually finish it. I personally have always found the Kimura from half guard easier than the Kimura from full guard, because I find that the fact I don't have to worry about my legs being all the way around the person gives me a bit more mobility in my hips, and I can set up angles a bit better. So the first thing I look at is how we get there, and then dealing with the most common defenses that my opponent's going to use. So most commonly, if I'm here, I will have this space, I'll have the collar grip here, which keeps me forcing the shoulder backwards and prevents him getting into my space too much. And then when it comes to the Kimura itself, to attack a Kimura grip, I need his hand to be behind his shoulder. If it's in front, I'm just going to roll over it and fail. And this is super common. You'll see guys will do this and will sit around here, and then the person will just hug you and you'll lose the position, unless you're way bigger and stronger. So, and I'm going to start off, with my position here and here, and then I'm basically, if I can, I'm going to take a thumb and forefinger grip. I'm going to push this backwards and pull forwards, initially. Okay, as I get to here, I'm going to sit myself forwards and up. I'm going to grab here, and again, I want to make sure that when I do this, this gets pulled relatively forwards. Again, just because I have the grip now, just because it's here, doesn't mean he can't change his position. So if I sit even a little bit lower, he can still retreat back, and I lose it. You can do this whole thing without the thumb, but generally you're going to need the thumb and forefinger grip to begin with to steer, and we'll take the thumb out afterwards. But in general, I'm going to sit over here. As I catch this point, I'm going to bring him forwards as I stuff the hand behind. In an ideal world, once I'm here, I will switch my hands and I would just submit him like this. Again, most of the time, that's not going to happen, because as I get to here, he's going to bring his knee forwards or whatever, and I'm going to end up with his hand underneath his body here. If my setup is good and he doesn't have time to defend all that well, he's basically going to have his hand just underneath his thigh in like a no-gi grip. If I was quick and that was the only defense he had, we're going to end up here. And this is still usually the end of the road for a lot of people. If I'm really big and strong, I can just rip it out. But most of the time, he brings his knee a little bit further forwards, and we're stuck here. There's no path to get to the Kimura because his leg is just in the way. Okay? So, what I'm going to try and do from here now is find an angle where I can be strong. And right now, again, it's not this way because it physically can't pass that way. So what I'm going to try and do is pull the hand towards me and then re-establish an angle where the hand can now pass this way. So the first thing, obviously, is to have the Kimura set up. Now, to get this to work, I'm going to have to start lifting my left hip up. So I start, again, turning on my face. My forehead may even hit the ground. That's normal, okay? But if I'm just here with my hands in front of myself, if I try to pull his arm, my own body is in the way. I cannot generate any force that way, so I cannot really move his arm very much. So I need to put my head on the ground. I need to lift my left hip up, almost like I'm trying to hip bump him over. And if you're really big and strong, you might be able to do that. I'm not going to lie. But in general, I need to get up so that I can create space underneath my body here. Once I can do that, I can generate force by pulling my elbow behind myself because I'm no longer in the way. So if I'm holding here, my head hits the floor, my left foot goes on the ground usually, and I lift my whole body up. And my butt leaves the ground. Okay, so now, my weight being on my forehead, I'm now going to rip the hand towards me. I may even move myself backwards a little bit to generate more force, and basically pull his back of his hand to my chest here. Okay, and as I do that, my left elbow clamps down straight away to really ensure I have that shoulder control. I don't just pull this way, because that doesn't help me very much. I need to pull and have a pull in this direction as well, which will keep that hand angle. Once I have that, and I pull it into my chest, I lift up, I rip to me, then when I come back, I'm going to turn my head to look towards the left, really pull his shoulder down, and then move my butt back out towards my right. So I'm basically going to turn to here, drop down to there, and then I'm going to move my butt a little bit further over, elbow comes down, and I turn my shoulders over to bring the hand up behind the neck. Avoid the temptation to try and use this hand too much. Again, if you start pushing with this, the hand gets very, very strong relatively. He'll start stiff arming, and I'm going to get stuck here. There is a counter to that, but in general, it's a problem you can avoid by making sure you've got the maximum angle in this way, and your shoulders are already turned to look slightly towards the left. Okay, it's the same idea as doing it from the full guard, but again, you have to change the hip angle a little bit differently. So I have the position set up. I have it all put in here. My forehead goes to the ground. My right foot is hooked in. My left foot is just on the ground somewhere. Again, my head comes in. I turn up. I try to basically hip bump through him, and then I pull the elbow behind myself here. And then as I have that, I drive my hips forwards. I pull backwards here, and then I turn, and I start to move my hips out, and I get my finish from there. It comes out very explosively and very quickly, and he should go from the grip breaking to being face down and usually not having time to tap, to roll out or to really escape too much. He'll just have to tap and give up the position. That is the Kimura setup that I prefer from the half guard. Sometimes when you're attacking in the Kimura from the half guard, their arm will begin to become free, and there's a risk that they will begin to escape the position. This most commonly happens when I end up going too much this way, and he begins to straighten the arm here. And mechanically, it's quite hard to force it back down. If I'm much bigger and stronger, it's easier, but again, if I don't have the proper bend and shoulder control, we're now just wrestling with his arm. And generally, he has the slightly stronger position, although I do have both of my hands. Okay, so the finish I quite like to go to from here, presuming I'm about to lose it. Obviously, if I can keep it crunched down here, that's always better. But if the arm is mostly straight and he begins to straighten his shoulder here, there is an option to come around and pinch just here with my knuckles in line with his thumb here. So I have the regular Kimura, he goes to straighten, I loosen my arm, and we end up here, with the same as the straight arm bar that you'd do from top side control or top half guard. So we catch here. I might be able to finish here, but generally it's strongest when I'm mostly flat on my back. So I will get this position, I will come down, and now it's lined up properly with my body, and I can extend through and finish from there. Now, it's very possible that he'll go to defend this, but the most common way to do it is to bend back the way he came, and now I have a second chance at the Kimura, or absolute worst case, it goes back underneath his leg again, and we're back to the beginning from here. It's just an extra option, but it is a nice way, when you know you've lost control of the arm partially, to regain it through the threat of the armbar attack. So again, we pull the arm out, well, this comes around to here, and then I will roll it around and pinch really, really hard. Because again, I have to control the rotation of his hand, and to do that, I need to pinch my fingers into the heel of my palm here. And again, you'll have to find exactly where the elbow is. Everyone's body type is different. Your arms will be longer or shorter as well. But if I go above his elbow, it's obviously going to fail. If I go way down, it's too loose. So generally, we'll roll it around, and you just got to find that sweet spot here. If it's here, in front of me, it's much more likely it will just bend back down here. If it's above me, we have a slightly stronger finish. But if it goes past my head here, he will now fold the arm forwards, and I'm going to end up here. So there's a very fine line where it's applicable, but it's a very easy additional threat where you have very little to lose by trying it because you're already in the middle of losing the position. So if it does come to here, we can get the positioning here or here, but don't take it past my center line here, because then it will always just keep rotating and I'll lose the position there. And then again, this isn't the end of the world, but it's no longer a dangerous place. So here, starts to come up, he straightens. We can try here, but always make sure it follows the midline of your chest to there, and then we can finish it. Push down and just roll the knuckles upwards so you push your forearm as a fulcrum through his elbow. That is the straight armbar finish from the Kimura. Probably the most irritating defense that doesn't actually get your opponent out of the Kimura is when they grab hold of their belt. It might be on the side somewhere, but usually around this point here. This becomes incredibly hard to generate the angle before because, again, it's very easy to be strong when you're holding around something. If you've got to hold with your fingers, it's one thing, but it fills the whole of his palm, which basically makes it very, very hard for me to actually break the grip out. So if we get to here, we're usually going to have to find a different way of creating a finish. And the most common way I find that works is to start trying to throw my left leg over onto his hip. Now, the exact way I do this will depend a little bit on where his arm here is, okay, and how my knee is able to get over. Generally, I'm going to basically shove his hip backwards as much as I can, pushing his hand into his hip. My left leg is going to go on the ground, and I'm going to scoot backwards. I'm going to bring my knee up partly through his face and end up on the far side here. And then much like we did with the omoplata, my knee will turn inwards, my foot will curl outwards, and I will pass the leg up and over to here. Okay, this I will fully admit is stolen from Kyotera. If I go straight to here, I'm kind of hanging off him like a handbag. This is a terrible, terrible place to be. And so what is a very good way of stopping this happening is to take my left leg and curl it hard onto his back once, twice, which really puts him down. He's still going to hold on to something, that's fine. But now when I place the foot here, I'm no longer over-rotated face down. I'm still in alignment, and so now if I want to break the grip, I can basically pull my back through and just extend, break the grip from here, and now I have the arm. Now, different things can happen here. If he's not super flexible or his posture is collapsed, we can just bring the hand up here and finish from there. That's pretty strong overall. What will often happen, however, if I'm a little bit looser, if you keep down for a second, is as I go for this, as I basically start to curl from here, he will often roll forwards. I have to make sure that my legs are kind of clear, my foot is on the hip, and so as he rolls, because he has to, because otherwise his shoulder comes off, he will turn over. I will keep the Kimura grip. My legs will naturally turn into the armbar position, and I'll slide out, both hands on the wrist, both heels tight, hold, lift up, and you'll finish the armbar from there. That is the leg curl step over finish from the half guard Kimura. An alternate finish from this position that I quite like is to go from, rather than just pressing over the head, is to go to the leg lace position, which in this case, I mean I'm going to cross my right leg, my right foot over my left foot. So again, this won't work if my opponent has posture. If his head's up a little bit, I'm not going to be able to magically just close my feet there. But if I've done, as followed from the previous technique, if I've really broken his posture down, here, we're most of the way towards this. What I'm going to try and do, though, is I'm going to try and pull my right leg towards his head to make him effectively smaller. So I'm trying to pull his knee into his face to make him more compressed. Again, I can't bring my foot to my foot, but I can bring him a bit closer here. So basically, I'm going to pull my knees together and my heels together, so I'm basically crunching around his upper body and his knee. Then once I've got to that, I will cross my feet, and we're settled into basically a closed guard foot position here. This is really, really strong because it takes away his ability to generate any posture or power because of the level of compromise of his spine here. His head is broken down, and so wherever his grip is, unless it's some truly fantastic, he's got great grip strength, or he started really, really deep, it's almost impossible for him to maintain a grip when he can't use his body to really reinforce it. So from here, I have that. This is all closed in. My feet are crossed, my knees are together, and then same as before, I pull out, I break it away here, and then I pass the arm up behind the back. He loses the ability to roll most of the time because his neck is also compromised, and so I can basically just crank this. And also, even someone who's way bigger and stronger, if you can establish this crunch position, you will always be effectively more powerful when it comes to pursuing the finish. So again, if I happen to be here, I get this all set down, I decide this still isn't happening, this leg comes back, I curl down again, I bring my knees together inwards, I cross my feet, and again, then I do the same break, but my knees stay tight and we turn up, and we make him touch the back of his head. That is the leg lace finish from the half guard Kimura. Sometimes, despite all of your best efforts and changing up your technique, you still can't break the grip that the person has on their pants or the inside of their leg, and so you basically can't get the Kimura finish that you've been looking for. In this case, what I like to do is try to switch to sweeping rather than submitting. And probably the easiest way I've found to do that, the safest anyway, is the Roger sweep, which is after Roger Gracie, who popularized it against Bruno Bastos at the Worlds quite a few years ago now. He does it slightly differently to me because his body type isn't quite the same, but this is the way that I prefer. So we have exactly the same normal Kimura grip, but we can't get the hand out. We have all the control, but we can't break it and get a finish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my hand out and put the hand on the belt. Okay, it's also possible sometimes that this happens before I get the Kimura grip in the first place, so it can happen the other way around. I can be working here, and then I can, rather than going for this, I can go straight to this as well. Also works. The grip on the wrist, it can be either way. I can either go thumb and forefinger, which gives you a bit more control but a bit less lift, or thumb out, which gives you more lift but a little bit less control. It will depend a little bit on the person's arm length compared to you, a bunch of other factors. So we're going to have the control here and here. So now what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and roll him laterally across my shoulders. If I'm really big and strong, maybe I can just throw him on his face and bundle him over. You'll see this happen sometimes. The person will just go here and throw the person there. But that's not really practical, because the majority of the time what he's going to do is, because I'm controlling this arm, but his other arm is totally free. So if I try and take him forwards, he'll just put his hand on the ground in that direction, and he won't go anywhere. Okay? I mean, I can keep pulling, but that's very strong mechanically. He's not going to move all that much. Okay? So what I'm looking to do is to make that first movement happen. This hand comes out here, and then I want to roll backwards over my shoulders in this direction, where he no longer has a base, because this hand is on this side, and I'm controlling this side here. Okay? So first things first, I have to really play with his base a little bit more to make this happen. If I just start from scratch and do this, he doesn't really have to react very much. I need the first movement to be substantial. So generally what I will do is I'll keep my grip, I'll keep this, I'll drive off my left foot on the ground and try to basically hip bump him across the mount. This isn't going to work, but it will force him to push back into me. So if I'm across here, I base my foot down, I lift my hips up, I try to take him towards this side here. Again, in an ideal world, if his base isn't very good, you can just pop the whole way over and take top position. It will sometimes happen. Generally not, but it can on occasion. So I have this all set up, I have the control here. So the aim is, again, I push off, I bridge in this direction, boom, comes back down, and then as I feel some pressure back in, I pull back, the hand comes down, and then I'm going to use my knee here to nudge him and begin to take his weight slightly more over me. And once I've got this, because by keeping this knee here, I have a check that stops him from retreating backwards too much. If I just do this, then he goes to here, he comes back, I've got no momentum to work with. So I start to pull, I start to nudge here, and then I'm going to roll directly backwards over my shoulder in this plane, whilst blocking the one hand he can use to base. So the movement will basically be this. So I have this control, I have the foot, I push over, well, doesn't do much, I pull backwards, I draw this down, my knees come in, I come over the top, and I settle into top position here. Again, the higher your hips go, the easier it will be. So one more time. Scoot around. So, hands defended, I had the Kimura grip in, I come to the back here. I base down, I push away, I pull, I lift. I come to this side. I might have to let go of the Kimura, but ideally I arrive on top with the Kimura in, and then I have a chance to attack this from the top, or I can just abandon it, punch the underhook, and go from there. The next technique we're going to look at is the dog bar, which is a knee bar from bottom half guard using the hips and legs. Personally, I find it more effective than the regular knee bar, and it is a very easy attack that you can also mix in with your sweeping combinations. So we'll start off in the regular underhook half guard position. So again, we've done all this before, but we'll come through and we'll get through to here. Okay? We'll start from the outside first. So the thing we have to take into account, to do this, to successfully attack the person's knee, I need to have the connection between his knee and my hips. So this means that the exact position I'm going to start from will always be from the lockdown. Because if I don't have that connection there, if I have a normal position for the sweeping half guard, you're going to end up with it twisted and his knee will be outside my hips and I'll have no connection directly between my pelvis and his kneecap, which is what we're trying to attack. So the first thing I have to do is line up his leg with my hips, and that's always done with the lockdown. So we start with the underhook, that's fine. I will switch in and I will establish the lockdown as normal. Now, what I do with the other hand will depend a little bit, but I'm going to show the ideal grips first. The ideal grips for me is to have my elbow in front of his shin here. So normally, again, I'm hooking just here. Here, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to go in front of his leg rather than underneath his thigh. I'm going to shoot through, and I'm going to use my hips to bump him up a little bit to bring him up here. And what I want is to have my elbow here on his shin here. Now, the next thing I'm going to try and do is to bring my hands around here, and I'm going to connect my hands behind his hip here. Okay, so this locks me very tight, and it makes it very hard for him to rotate out or change positions. You can do other angles, but this gives me the best overall control, in my opinion. So this pulls in tight. I'm usually going to go to an S grip because your arms usually aren't long enough to really lock anything else. So my fingers will lock together here. Okay. Once I have that, I'm going to bring myself down a little bit more, and I'm going to place my left foot directly over his ankle here, pinning his leg straight. My right foot is going to cross over that. I'm going to adjust my pelvis so it's underneath his kneecap, and then I'm going to bridge up, keeping his foot pinned down, and extend my hips through to get the finish from there. Again, we can combine this with sweeps, which we'll look at afterwards, but for the basic finish, this is it. You go lock down, you slide down to pin the ankle, you pin his foot to the floor, and then you bridge up, making sure your hips stay in alignment. I might be slightly to one side, or I might bring him all the way over me to here. In either case, I'm still in alignment with his knee, so then when I bridge up, you go directly onto his knee, and you get the tap fairly easily from there. That is the dog bar from underhook half guard. Although in an ideal world we'd always finish the dog bar from bottom position, a lot of the time we lose a little bit of control over the person's body, or they just really take a large movement, which means that I can no longer keep the angle that I want to finish from the bottom, and I will have to go from the bottom position to the top position and finish from there. So we'll start exactly the same way. I will shoot myself underneath, I will get the hip control that I need, and I will start threatening the position here. Okay. Now, what will happen next will depend a little bit on how he chooses to go. If he begins to try and sit this hip towards the ground, then I will follow him up the top position here. More commonly is as I elevate him over me, his shoulders turn to the other side, and he ends up getting turned all the way over to here. Okay. So once I end up on top from here, I'm going to try, if possible, to keep this control over the hips. Because again, by having my fingers locked in, I pretty much kill this hip, which makes it very hard for him to create any angle on the other leg. So I'll try and keep these both if I can. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my feet down to his ankle, here to pin his ankle in place. Both of my feet make a small sort of frame underneath his foot to keep it up, and that then creates the tension that allows me to push my hips down to get the finish from there. If you find that in the course of the movement you happen to lose this grip, it's quite hard to get it back. It's possible, and it's a very strong finish if you can get it, but if the foot comes away, to really bring this back in and get the grip back is almost impossible. So what we're going to do instead, if you do happen to lose the grip, is you're going to go underneath, we're going to grab the belt, we're going to pull very tight in here to ensure we have some degree of control, and we're going to finish exactly the same way. Just because we don't have quite as good grips, it doesn't mean it won't work at all from here. So again, my feet elevate his ankle, and then my hips drive down, and we'll finish from there. One of the most common problems you're likely to encounter as a half-guard player, particularly a traditional underhook half-guard player, is your opponent backstepping into reverse half-guard. This is a common setup for knee bars, later on for heel hooks and other things, and it's something where you lose a lot of your control and they begin to become the attacker again. So obviously we'd like to prevent this before it becomes a problem. So the first thing we're going to look at is preventing it, and then we're going to look at the cure should it happen later on. So we're going to start off in our normal underhook position. Again, we have this grip here. We will have either the pants grip or an underhook on the leg, depending at what stage we happen to be. But whichever it is, the first thing, the priority is avoiding this leg from stepping over to the other side. Just very quickly, again, particularly if I have the knee twist already set in, just if Daniel will just backstep into the reverse half. This is what we're trying to avoid. because my underhook that was previously working is now no longer doing anything, and now he can place his weight on me, and it's a very awkward position where my lower body is very isolated compared to everything else. So, come back a second. So, in terms of preventing it, we have to stop this from getting to the other side. So, we've got a couple of options. So, first thing, obviously, if we have a pants grip, and we have this set in, and we have decent grips, whether it's on the hip or whatever, the first thing that's quite possible is if I have this grip, if he attempts a back step from here, we're basically just going to hit the rollback sweep from earlier, where we're basically going to come over, punch, and come on top. Okay, from his perspective, it's usually not the correct idea because I have too much control, but it is possible if my grip is weak that he might be able to break the grip and backstep. But if you have that in the first place and you feel him go for it, you will nearly always just get the sweep. If I don't have this yet, it's a little bit more complicated. I will have to try and control this, again, with the underhook grip here. So if he tries to backstep from there, I'm going to try and bring it towards me and prevent him from getting so far away that, again, the leg is now his to control and my arm's not doing anything. So again, if I do feel him going for the back step there, I can hold in here and I can maintain this grip and again prevent too much of that turn. Another option which is also available from here, it's a little bit more risky, but it's perfectly valid as well. If I don't have any grips here, I happen to be working and I'm not fully controlling here at all. If he does go for a back step, I can also just bring my leg up temporarily and block his butt basically from changing to the other side. Obviously, I will lose some control over his leg if this happens, but I can then usually regain that. So basically, as he comes back, we'll stop it from there, and then we'll re-engage and hit it back in from there. This is one of the various ways we can do to stop it, but again, sometimes he will get ahead of us, he will get into the reverse half, and we'll look at techniques afterwards for taking that and turning it into a sweeping position from the bottom. So we're now going to look at what happens if we are too slow and we can't prevent the back step from happening. So I might be working in, I might be getting set this up, and then before I have any control over his body, he switches to the other side and back steps through to here. Okay? So the first thing I have to be aware of is I cannot let my lower body be separated too much from my upper body. So I cannot leave my legs straight away from me because it gives him a chance to pull them to one side or whatever and start getting the pass happening. I need to bring myself back together into one unit. So generally, as soon as this happens, I'm going to bring my knees towards my chest. Here. Okay, this also will slightly rock his base a little bit higher and make it a bit more difficult for him to be comfortable here. This hand that was on the back, it's kind of useless living out here, so usually I will take it up to the back of the collar. This gives you something you can use later on, and it also prevents him, not everyone does this, but sometimes they will, if my arm's too wide, he might punch an underhook through in my armpit here, and then switch back to the other side with a head down pass, and then smash me flat. So we want to avoid that, so to keep my elbow really close, if it's here, there's no real chance of him digging his hand through here. Okay, so we can turn a little bit here. So now, I'm in this position, my knees are quite close to my chest, I have my collar grip, and we're here. So there's two versions of this, we're going to show the simple one and the one I prefer first. I'm going to take my hand here, I'm going to pull his knee up a bit, and I'm just going to grab his pants at the knee here. My elbow will be kept very low towards here. I don't want, if I leave it high, it's very easy for him to just strip the hand off or punch through, and it just gives me less control later on. So I'm looking to keep this elbow really tucked down, and again, grab it close to the knee where you get as much cloth as possible. So we're settled in here. My knees will come close, which also will slightly usually elevate his ankles off the ground. So when I'm here, I'm now basically going to pull up, I'm going to cross this leg underneath, so I have a small butterfly hook underneath his leg here. So usually the sequence, I'm going to pull up with one, going to place one, and then usually I'm going to circle the other one out, so both of my legs are underneath here. Okay? And then basically all the movement is now is I'm going to pull his head backwards, I'm going to start to drive up with my hook, and I'm going to start punching his leg towards this side. So basically I've got my elevation in. If I'm not actively going for the sweep, I'll usually leave this leg on top just for the control. If I am worried about him going for a knee bar or something else, I will hide it underneath so my leg is not directly attackable from there. Once I have this going, again, I bring this up. If I have to, I can base this foot on the ground to get some more drive, and I kick up and I punch towards this side. Boom, we come on top. As soon as I get here, I'm going to drive my head into his head to prevent him from turning back. I don't kick him away from me. Then he's going to come back on top and he's going to lose the position. So I will start to kick up, and then I will drive in, and then I will push with the hand and the head and turn him away to this side. That's one option. The secondary, which is very similar, slightly stronger, but I feel it takes a little bit more time, and so generally it's not worth the extra time, is if the gi happens to be untucked, or I can untuck it, I can also come underneath the leg completely and grab the collar on the other side. The advantage of this, particularly if I've really fed the grip, is that there's basically no way for him to complete the pass, because even if he takes the leg out, again, I'm still solid and controlling here. So I can do the same thing, same grips, and basically put his knee into his chest and come back. It's not foolproof because it does still run the risk that I may do this and he may switch and slice to the other side. So if you step over onto that, then he can come down here, and then I can still lose the position in a scramble from there. But in general, I prefer this grip, but if we have the option, then take this, feed it deeply in there, make sure your arm flares to keep it up, and then we kick, we turn, and we come up into top position from there. In general, the attacker on top in reverse half guard is going to keep the cross-face positioning here, and so the previous technique is the one most likely to apply. However, you're going to find people who either decide to switch their arm over completely, to control the hips and start sliding out, or again, on occasion, they might be fishing for like a kimura or something else, and you might be able to hide your arm, and as they sit forward, they go up across your torso rather than across your legs. Okay? So should the arm end up on this side, either because you put it there or because he put it there, we're going to do a different sweep completely. This works on pretty much exactly the same principles as the half octopus guard that we showed earlier. The first thing I have to be sure of is that I am turning myself face down towards the ground to my left as much as possible. I cannot do this when I'm flat, because anything I do with my leg, if my knee is pointing outwards, it's very easy to remove any hook I might put in. So the first thing I do is turn my chest all the way down to the floor. My right hand is going to grab hold of my opponent's belt here. Once I have this, I'm going to keep turning over. I'm going to move my backside out a little bit, and I'm going to take my right foot and hook it inside his leg here. If possible, I may even adjust it and try and get my toes all the way through in front of his calf, in front of his shin here. Once I have this, the next step is I need to take his weight off his backside, where it all is right now. So I'm going to flare my right knee out and use my left knee to bring his weight forwards a little bit. This will raise his backside off the ground. So once that's done, all I'm going to do, again, my elbows along the back of his spine, I will bring him forwards, I will slide my left knee out behind him, and then I will slide myself out the rest of the way here. So I have one hook, and I'm most of the way towards his back. I can then go to a regular harness grip, scoot away a tiny bit more, and take the back with both hooks, and I've gone from the bottom position all the way to a controlling top position. When I first started playing half guard, by far my most successful submission was the loop choke. Traditionally, we're going to begin inside the knee shield half guard with one grip in the collar, which is how we're defending this shoulder from coming forwards anyway. Now, the important part to make the loop choke work is that I will need to break his posture or raise my body above his, or a combination of the two. So, in general, when I'm doing this, it's very hard to do when I'm on my elbow unless my opponent is straight up terrible. Okay, so most likely I'm going to have to put my hand on the ground and get some elevation and some drive off this arm. Usually that's going to pass through this to my other hand. I'm going to use it to drive his head away a little bit. I'm encouraging him to push back in because that's how I'm going to create the momentum for the actual attack. So I'm going to push away with this. As he begins to put back in, I'm going to open my elbow up here. So it's partly blocking his shoulder, and I get a cutting pressure into his neck. Now, you can try and attempt the loop choke just from here, but what will generally happen is that he will just drive his head into my face, and I'll end up trying to do this. This is a terrible choke that will do basically nothing. So I need to redirect his head to the outside and downwards, break his posture to get the maximum pressure possible on the finish. So I'm here. I will usually, if I'm on my elbow again, I'll come to my hand. I will push away a little bit. As he pushes back, we'll establish this pressure. If you're a little bit unsure if you can do it, you can usually just test to see if you can raise your elbow. If you can, then you're okay to commit to the final technique. So I will push away a little bit, it comes in, I will drag down. My hand, which is on the ground now, is going to have to come off and go up and behind his head here. So obviously I don't get to do this. If I fall to my back and I haven't got the position yet, I'm not going to get the angle. So I can't do this and try and come back. So I'm going to have to really get higher, commit to it. My elbow is above here. Then I come over and I stuff the head down and out to this side. I want to get my hand here behind my elbow with my fingers pointing upwards. So we set in here. Now, to prevent him from just driving me flat, I'm going to bring my left knee up into the space here, which makes it very hard for him to A, use this hand to push my elbow off, because a very common defense to this is, again, if I'm here, just to push the elbow down and take the head out. So I need to avoid that. So my knee will come up here, and then usually I'm just going to chamber my knee downwards here, and then circle my leg outwards to the side here. Okay? And then I'm going to push my elbow down and pull through to get my finishing pressure. Now, this can be done badly and still work, but the primary aim with it is to make sure that you're not just a little bit looser here. If I do this and I just kind of hang him with his gi, it will work, but it's very, very slow. What I need to do is really get a good bite into the side of his throat, so you need to know that this part of this thumb, this part of your wrist is cutting directly in there. So the choke should be almost instant. It shouldn't be a slow burner, kind of hanging off the back kind of thing. So I'm going to push up, I'm going to push away a little bit. I will let this happen. This will come up. I will come up a little bit higher as well, and I will go over and stuff, sort of wax on, wax off his head to the side. My left knee comes to my chest to nullify his arm, and then I can finish it from here, but usually I will drive it down and throw it over here, and then I'll push the elbow down and pull through and get a very quick, very fast finish. It'll be a lot on the person's throat, but they will go unconscious very, very quickly. Just as a quick note, the mechanics of this are very, very similar, almost identical to that of a high elbow guillotine. Because if you think about it, this here is identical to the same idea with the high elbow, pretzel grip guillotine, or anything else. So if you want a reference, it is exactly the same technique and uses almost exactly the same pressure, but just applied with the gi rather than out. This is the loop choke from half guard. Another common style of passing that you need to be ready for is the over-under. So obviously, if I'm literally in the full locked knee shield, it's quite hard for this to happen, but there's plenty of situations where I might be sitting up or getting ready to go, and he brings his arm under and begins trying to pass this way. Okay, this is hugely annoying, and certain people will try and pass this way and will cause you a lot of trouble. So the first thing to look at before we look at the direct sweeps is how do we minimize the threat to begin with. So particularly if I get forced flat, things are not ideal. But what I have to avoid primarily is his chin getting into my far hip on the other side. Once he gets across this side here, I am basically in huge trouble because I don't have any movement in my hips. I'm very flat. So the first thing I'm looking to, particularly if this has already happened, but preferably before, is that I need to try to get his head to the outside here. So I'm going to try and take the blade of my wrist underneath his nose, underneath his face, dig it upwards, and pass it towards the other side. This is never going to be as easy as that, but out of respect for my partner's nose, I'm going to be a little bit more gentle. But I'm going to come underneath the nose here, and then as we start turning, my foot goes on the ground here, and I start to move my butt out, and then crush it down towards this side here. Okay, and if that's the way of countering what's already happened. In terms of prevention, if he's a little bit further away, I can also reach over the back, place myself here, and stop his head from ever reaching that position in the first place. Either way, I cannot allow his head to get to there, and so if it begins to get there, I need to remove it, and if there's a chance to stop it happening in the first place, I will take a big grip either on the belt or on the back, and then put my shoulder through his face. My body needs to support this movement. If I just am on my side here, he will still drive his head through. I need to make sure I'm really driving and pressuring against it. If I can do this, I can begin to isolate this arm, and we can look at a sweep, which we'll follow up with next. A more proactive and offensive counter to the entire position is what I call the bundle sweep, which I borrowed off my instructor, Roger Gracie. And it starts when you have this initial separation of their head and you have a bit more time to work. We're not fully defensive. We're not having to really get the head out, which creates a bit more space. We can take some time to actually set up our sweeps and options. So I'll have one grip on here, preventing his head from going too far over. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my left leg and I'm going to leg curl it directly through his arm. Now, if his head is on the outside where it shouldn't be right now, it's very, very hard to break this grip because his arm isn't particularly isolated. Once his head is passed to this side, this arm, this shoulder takes the whole of my leg's pressure, and it's relatively easy to crush the arm down and basically remove the underhook from being particularly dangerous. So we start with a palm down grip on the belt, and I'm going to take this leg and I'm going to just curl it directly through as hard as possible his arm, which will hopefully break any grip he might have on my belt, and drops this arm down here. Now, the next step I want to do is I want to go from this grip here to an underhook grip with my opposite hand. But if I'm staying flat on my back here, I can't really make that work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to arch my back backwards here, and I'm going to change to a palm up grip on the other side of his head here, which again keeps his head towards this side, which is perfect, and now means that I can sit up and bring my chest up behind here. My left hand here is going to go behind his leg to really bring his weight forwards. So I can't just sit here because he might retreat, so my arm hooks deep with the elbow behind his leg here. Now, once I'm at this position, I have a good setup for trying to sweep him. The arm that's trapped inside here, if he happens to remove it, I can just go straight to his back. If he doesn't like it, it's uncomfortable, I've got my one hook, I can straight arm drag to there. A lot of the time, though, either it stays stuck, or he just doesn't want to do that, or he just clings to the one leg that he has, which is the near side one, and so we're looking to try and reverse from here. So my grip is still here, my weight is still down in his head, my left hand hooks behind where it is, and now I need to remove my right leg because currently that's hooked inside his knee, which will prevent him from actually rolling. So I hook the leg, I remove the leg, my own leg from in between, and then I'm going to lift and turn him in this direction here. Now, it's entirely possible he's going to try and turn to his knees and fight, but I'm still able to reach top position. I can spin to his back, or again, if I get enough lift and drive with the initial position, I can come on top and take side control. A very common response from my opponent as I start moving towards either the arm drag or the bundle sweep is that as I start to kick my leg down and go through that, if I do it correctly and my knees are pinched tight, I will isolate his arm and we can go to the previous technique. Sometimes, however, I'll go down a bit too much and he'll be able to take the arm up and over, which puts him, in a different position, and the arm is no longer isolated in the same way. However, if I've done this correctly, his head should still be on this side of my body. So the next step I'm going to go for is going back to the previous overhook attacks, which is the omoplata primarily, but also the triangle should it come to that. So once I have his head turned to this side, I still have the option to raise my knee, but I'm going to move my body out a little bit more. I'm going to push his head down, and I'm going to raise my left knee up. Now, a little bit different to the previous situation. It's going to be harder for me to get my knee out than it was before because he's holding my leg now. Previously, again, his hand was floating somewhere, so I didn't have to work quite so hard. So this may require a tiny bit more flexibility if you want to go straight to the omoplata or the overhook position, or you can just fight a little bit harder to make the knee come out after. But he's probably going to be holding onto the leg, so you may have to use this hand a bit more actively than previously, forcing your way out to get to here, and then establishing the knee clamp. And that will again set up all of your other attacks, the omoplata, the triangle, and all the other things from there. Pretty much the only escape from mount I've used for my whole jiu-jitsu career is the leg trap. As an added bonus, it takes you straight to half guard, which is the position obviously that I am most experienced in. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that we are on our side, but also that our opponent is not too high up our body. So we're going to take one of our hands, in this case my right hand, because I'm looking to trap using my left leg. My right hand is going to go across the body here, and if possible, I'm going to try and tuck my left elbow inside. That's not always the case, but the key thing here is I cannot allow my pressure point to go past the center line of his body. So my weight is not on my hand. I'm not doing this, in which case he might circle and pass to a worse position for me. My hand will go directly across his body, and my elbow will flare, and my elbow will not cross that line there. So my weight is on the right side of my body, not on my hand here. Once I have that in play, again, if he's a little bit high, I may have to wriggle up a little bit, but I'm trying to get my left elbow in and my shoulders turned to this side. As you see, my knees will also start turning, because if my hips don't support the movement, I'm going to be very weak. So if I start flat here, I'm not going to have any turn. So my shoulders, my knees, everything will set things up. Now, the first thing I need to do is to start digging this leg out. So for that to happen, I'm going to turn myself on my side, I'm going to straighten this leg, I'm going to turn my toes to face to the left, here, and then I'm going to swing my leg this way to make his foot flare out away from his body. If his foot is still close to here, if I go to drag it, which I can do, I may connect, but I don't have the ability to stay on my side and do it. So I need to take his leg a long way away from his body. So I'm going to bring it out to this side here. My weight is still on my elbow, my left elbow is still down. So I will swing basically my thigh and my knee into his heel. Now, my right leg is going to step over the top here, and I'm going to hook directly over, and I'm just going to pull it over my foot here. This is most of the escape, and this is often enough. But what we want to do is go back to actually a stronger, good defensive half guard. Right now, his knee is still on the floor, and the better your opponent is, the more likely they are to set their weight on here, and it's hard to bring my knee the rest of the way out, back to a full knee shield defensive position. So I need to get the weight off his knee and his knee off the ground so I can get this knee out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this heel tucked in, and I'm going to flare my right knee outwards, which will twist his knee off the ground a little. It doesn't need to go very much, it just needs to disconnect here. If I just try and turn without taking my knee out, I'm basically just going to do this and just get mounted again. So I need to make sure that I have this connection in, and then I'm going to twist and move up a little bit. If I can use my elbow a bit more as well, even better. And now you see daylight underneath his thigh. So we open up, I will now push down. As my left knee goes higher than his knee, I can now start turning. And now what will happen next depends a little bit on his reaction. In an ideal world, we push this down, and I get my underhook, and I go straight to here. Sometimes, on occasion, as I get my knee out to here, he will start to retreat a bit, and I will go back to blocking the face, and we'll establish our knee shield position here. Either way, I've moved from the mount, probably the worst position in Jiu-Jitsu, to my strongest defensive position in the knee shield half guard. The vast majority of the time, the previous technique will be the easiest escape from the mount position. However, there are a couple of occasions where the person on top can react differently and make another escape slightly more applicable. So, from where I am, I may start setting up as we were going, but a common option for the person to do is to try and come up to technical mount and bring this heel close to my body. So if he slides his knees up and comes to here, this ends up very close, and obviously I can't trap the leg anymore. And if I try to do that, I'm just going to get my back taken and I'm going to get horribly choked. So what I have to do, as long as my arm here is still in the correct position, he cannot move to a full dangerous technical mount. Obviously if my arm's in the wrong place, he goes to real technical mount, I'm going to get my back taken or I'm going to get arm barred. Things are going to get very bad. So what I need to do is make sure I'm still here. So although he's made the pivot, his weight still remains mostly over my hips. Okay? So now the next thing I need to do, presuming he's doing this correctly, his heel will be directly connected to my body, and so there won't be any space yet. So what I need to do is try to tuck my elbow at least to his ankle, maybe not inside, but touching it, and then I'm going to basically scoop my butt backwards into his other leg to begin creating the space. If you're really strong, maybe you can push this away, but most of the time that's not going to happen. So you look to connect to basically to the outside of the ankle, because you can't get to the inside yet, block it a little bit, place your toes on the ground, and then begin to scoot away. Then you place your elbow to the inside, and now you have your frame. You can move again, and you begin to create this sort of 90-degree angle inside his knee. Now, usually from here, we've got two ways we can go. So I can now start to sort of wipe it around my leg, and I'll usually end up with my leg on the inside. Now, if there's still space, I would personally, rather than going to half guard, I'm going to come upwards, go double shin, and then come up into the footlock guard from there. However, on occasion, maybe because he's got shorter legs, there's not enough space, I make the first step happen, I wipe around to here, and then he may start turning his knee down towards me or whatever, and I go, okay, I can't make that happen, so I can drive away, sit out, establish the knee shield, block in, and again, re-establish the regular half guard from there. In general, the footlock position will be better, but it gives you another option for countering his counter to my escape. This is probably the simplest escape from side control, mechanically speaking. Although it may look a little bit like bad jiu-jitsu, it is extremely effective the whole way through your jiu-jitsu career. First of all, I'm going to take my right hand, I'm going to reach through the legs of my opponent, and I'm going to grab his pants at the knee all the way down here. Okay, as I do this, I'm going to mostly straighten my arm so I have a good deal of control. If I'm just holding and it's loose, it's not doing anything, it's more likely he'll be able to trap my arm. If I don't hold the knee and I reach through and try and grab the leg, or I grab lower down, he is likely to trap my arm, he's going to sit through, he's going to crucifix it, and I'm going to end up in a much worse position than I was previously. So I'm going to hold on to the pants grip down here, and then my other hand, usually, although again it's a little bit risky, I'm going to reach over the top, I'm going to clear his head and grab somewhere on his back with my elbow controlling his head. This is important. Again, there's a very, very fine line between me controlling him and him controlling me. If my elbow goes up this way, he will go straight into an arm triangle and put me in a bad place. What I want generally is my elbow to run along the length of his spine and downwards, so if he goes to drive his head back up, I can at least maintain this control briefly. You won't want to stay here, but temporarily it's fine. Again, I grip over here. If I can reach the belt, fine, but reaching the belt may lead to you going so deep that, again, the arm triangle becomes a risk. So you may need to go lower depending upon the scale of your body to your opponent's. For now, we're going to go to the middle of the back. Elbow is down. My left leg is going to step outwards, and I'm going to move my butt away a little bit to start, again, A, diminishing the risk here, and B, setting up some momentum for the following movement. Then basically what I'm going to do is, after I've got my butt out, I'm going to start bridging, and as if I'm trying to roll him to the other side. This is obviously not going to happen unless you're way, way bigger than your opponent, because he has hands that he can base with. So I have my control, I will turn into him and push a little bit, and I will start to bridge in this direction here, okay, which will begin to make him base his hands out. But in doing so, his weight will transfer mostly off his legs onto his hands, and it becomes relatively possible for me to stuff this leg back between my legs and re-establish the half guard. So I have my grip, I have the head pushed down here, left leg comes out, I push in, I bridge, I lift, I stuff, and I'll arrive here. Obviously, if I leave the arm here again, I run the risk of being arm triangled, so I will either circle back to this side, and we go back to a head controlling position there, or if I have enough space, I drop the elbow back down again, and we start to re-establish a good, normal defensive position. Probably my most commonly used escape from side control is to try and move towards the single leg, with the advantage of this being I can go from the single leg directly to the half guard, often with the underhook as well, setting up all the sweeps we've previously covered. So the first general step we're going to use, we have our normal frame, we have one hand blocking the neck, one hand on the hip, and we're going to step our feet out a little bit towards the side, because again I need to start getting myself facing to one side, I need to be able to look towards my opponent, so I need to step my leg out so my hips can translate a little bit in that direction. If I start flat, all I can do is bridge. I want to bridge and create space. Yeah. So my left leg will come out, I will start to lift his head up over my shoulder a little bit this way, and move my hips to one side as my right hand blocks his hip. Usually, again, if there's enough space, I can try and go straight to the underhook here. Usually there isn't enough space for that, so we're going to try and bring one knee across the body like a normal guard replacement would be. Once I get to here, although once I'm on the outside, it's hard to really get a full guard back. So now, following all the same principles we already had for getting the underhook from half guard, we're going to try and get the underhook from side control. So I'm here, I push the head away, I tuck my elbow and my forearm across the body, and then I use my leg here to propel myself, and I sit out to a single leg on this leg here. Again, you can sit for double legs, but again, it's easier to focus your entire body on controlling one part of his. So focusing entirely on the leg, my left hand is going to come behind his leg here, chopping down behind his knee. My other hand is going to become a gable grip here, and I'm going to pull his knee directly into my chest here. Now, we can try and finish the single leg, and that will work a lot of the time, it's fine. I can get up, I can dive in backwards, I can change into other sweeps and takedowns from there. But anytime I get to the single leg, I'm usually going to sit myself down and scoot in to one side. I'm going to twist his knee a little bit, opening up some space, and step my left leg over, hook his ankle, and pull it in. As soon as I pull it in, my left arm goes around the back, my right hand goes underneath the leg or directly to the knee, and I've transitioned immediately to the underhook half guard with all of my sweeps immediately available to me. And this applies both as a side control escape or any other time I'm forced to go to my knees. So this also will commonly happen if I'm playing, some kind of open guard or whatever, and he starts to pass this way. I can immediately sit in, take my single leg, pull, step, drag, and then re-establish from here. So it can be off a takedown from standing, but in all cases, when you try to have a single leg, you have the easy option to go straight to your half guard and use all of the skills you've previously developed. Back control is one of the worst positions that you can find yourself in Jiu-Jitsu. And so what we're going to look at now is escaping not only this terrible position, but then getting to half guard where we can then launch all of our attacks. So the first thing we have to be aware of, we're starting in this case with him having the harness already around our shoulders. So I'm going to grab hold of his sleeve here, and my other hand is going to go behind his elbow here to allow me to pull rotationally around the corner. If I just pull down, again, he can still be strong in his elbows, he can choke me, he can do all kinds of things. So I need to pull the arm the whole way over. This is the first thing we do. We get control over this arm. The next step is that I need to start trying to get my head on the floor. The most common mistake people make is they bridge straight upwards, which ends up keeping their head sandwiched between the person's shoulder and their head. So if I bridge straight upwards, I just get stuck here, and then usually I fall back to the wrong side. I'm looking to escape in the direction that the hand I'm holding is pointing, i.e. this way. So I need to get past his head. So the first thing I'm going to do is base my heels on the ground. I'm going to scoop myself downwards and then place the top of my head underneath his jaw. Once I have this, I can now use my feet that are still on the ground to bridge upwards and come past his head to this side here. So my head is mostly on the ground. But the main thing is his hooks are still in at this point. I need to remove at least one of the hooks to be able to get my full escape going. So I need to start to take the power out, and to do that, I'm going to move my backside sideways and sit on his thigh. So I'm going to step over a little bit more, and I'm going to scoot outwards and begin to put my hip on his thigh, which begins to put pressure on his knee and his foot. The hook probably won't come out completely, but it will mostly remove some of its ability to be strong. So I'll come down to around here. Okay? The whole time, guys, I'm doing this, I should be looking towards him, because if I look away, he might get control of my neck, and if he has control of my neck, he can control the rest of my body. So I keep this turned down, and I look to the right. Now, to get the actual hook out, I can't go vertically upwards relative to me, because the hook is still in. So what I'm going to do is circle steps. So I'm going to turn my knee inwards, and I'm going to bring it up and around. So I'm going to bring my knee towards my chest, over and out. And this will mostly remove the hook. Now that I'm here, I'm going to scoot even further outwards, keeping myself looking at him so that my back is as far away from his chest as possible. So I'm basically scraping him off my back. So my foot comes down, my backside comes out, I scoot away a little bit further here, and then as my back hits the floor, we can try to turn on top, but that runs the risk that we may create space he will then use to get back on my back. So in the context of half guard being our strong point, we're going to basically put our back on the ground, and we're going to hook this one leg, and then we're going to hip out further to our side here. Okay? And we're just not going to come back on top unless we're forced to. Basically, as we stay on our back. Eventually, he will choose to come on top. I will put my frame in. I will bring my knee back across. I will settle, and now we're back in a distant half guard with our knee shield in play.